don't subscribe to the old school way, nor the new school way, only the optimal way. The 80-20 baseball experience with Coach Ball.
Copy correctly. Julio and Gary. Growing up playing baseball in the 80s and 90s, the hitters I loved copying were Julio Franco and Gary Sheffield. Sure, they were both MLB All-Stars, but the reason I copied them was solely because of how they held their bat. As pitchers would start their deliveries, Franco would hold the bat over his head with the bat tip pointing out towards center field. And Gary, well, he would wiggle his bat in the coolest of ways. Gary Sheffield played 22 Major League seasons, hitting 509 home runs. And I think Julio's Major League career started way back in the 1950s and ended in 2007 when he became the oldest MLB player to hit a home run. While I may have erroneously added a few years to Julio's actual MLB tenure, it's very safe to say these two guys were solid players over a long period of time. However, my 11-year-old mind mistakenly tied their success to the way they held and the way they wiggled their bat, which in turn led to much frustration when I couldn't find success using their quirky pre-pitch moves. I copied players that warranted copying, but I mimicked the wrong thing while being ignorant of what truly made them good hitters. In fact, Franco and Sheffield were both successful hitters in spite of their pre-pitch funkiness. Even if that wiggling and pointing had been the sole reason for their success, I wouldn't have had the same success as them. I would have still struggled because I didn't have the massive arm strength that they had. There wasn't enough spinach in the world to get my 11-year-old forearm strong enough to manipulate the bat like those two Popeyes. The lesson I learned was that not all the things that great players do are all that great. Correlation does not equal causation. Many years have passed since those Little League days, and I've learned exactly who, and more importantly, what to copy and what to ignore. Franco and Sheffield were the correct players to learn from. However, I copied the wrong part of their hitting process. They were really good hitters in spite of the pre-pitch flair. The correlation did not equal causation. The lesson here is to be slow to copy the random things that great players do and double down on copying the techniques that all great players share. Look for common actions, not the isolated glitz. In all likelihood, great players will be successful in spite of some of their unique ancillary movements. Fernando Valenzuela was probably not a good pitcher because he looked up to the sky during his delivery. Fernando was good in spite of this upward glance. My guess is he would have had a slightly lower ERA had he kept his eyes locked on the target and his head more stable during his delivery. The message here is twofold. First, identify the correct players to mirror, and then look to copy the commonalities. The $5 billion recipe. There is a well-known quote that says, "Success leaves clues." A very interesting Hollywood example of this is Will Smith's rise to acting success. The uber-successful actor didn't move west from East Philly and randomly toss darts in the dark, hoping to hit the blockbuster bullseye. Before Smith ever made the move from hip-hop to Hollywood, he and his manager dissected the highest-grossing films of all time in search of their commonalities. Here's what Smith said. "I said to my manager, James Lasseter, I want to become the biggest movie star in the world. And he said, okay, well, let's figure out what that means. And he went and got the top 10 movies of all time, the list of the top 10 films of all time at the box office, top 10 box office successes. What we found is, at the center, there were always special effects, there were creatures, and there was always a love story. So we started looking to make movies that had special effects, creatures, and a love story." Smith and Lasseter could have listed out every single characteristic of every single successful film and then randomly chosen which aspects to use in their movies, but they didn't. They only copied the universal ingredients, and we can all learn from this and their path to success. We should all copy the way they copied. Will Smith intelligently implemented the commonalities of all the all-time greats, And coupled with a lot of hard work, he has now acted in 26 movies that have combined for an adjusted gross revenue of over $5 billion. Most importantly, Smith has made dozens of movies that people around the world have really enjoyed watching. Success leaves clues. Similar to the movie industry, the sport of baseball has left many clues in plain sight for many years. The clues to success are not hidden behind security clearance or protected by intellectual property laws, although in some cases with major league teams they are. But for the most part, you can see everything right there on the field. Just like the clues Smith and Lasseter used to create $5 billion worth of entertaining movies, the clues to better pitching mechanics, hitting mechanics, better base running, better fielding techniques are all right there for us to see clearly. Backtest rather than wait. The method for finding the right players and techniques shares characteristics with well-done research studies. In other words, the longer the study, the larger the sample size, the fewer the variables, the more valid the results will be. We want to look for the common traits from a large group of successful players over a long period of time. The good news is we don't have to wait for the conclusion of a 20-year longitudinal examination to find the players and the techniques worth emulating. Think about it like this. The quantitative revolution, sabermetrics, Moneyball, that has been taking place in the Major League front offices, it's been expedited through the use of statistical backtesting. Backtesting can be super useful in baseball because the game has been played using similar rules, techniques, equipment, field dimensions for well over 100 years. Sure, there have been small changes, but baseball is not as open to creativity as something like, say, technology. Variations of success are limited in baseball due to the acutely defined rules, the laws of physics, and the same 60-90 field dimensions that have been used for over 100 years. Therefore, backtesting a player's success will give us a valid group of qualified players, and from there, we can identify the vital commonalities. By using great websites like Baseball Reference and Fangraphs.com, coaches and players, and again, I'm not affiliated or associated with those. I just really like their sites a lot. Players can find the most statistically successful players, past and present, on those websites. Our search should require all qualifiers to have a large amount of at-bats, innings pitched, games played, etc. Once the list of great players has been established, once you've created that list of great players using statistical evidence, valid statistical evidence, and I highly recommend not using things like batting average, which don't paint the whole picture, a thorough and close inspection of their techniques using video and photo analysis will give us a very good idea of their common technique traits. Obviously, this is much harder to do as we go back in time, as video of Babe Ruth is of poor quality and extremely rare. Regular Joes. Now for a few points of caution as we look to learn from the best. Be wary of copying the genetic lottery winners, as they will get away with mechanical and technical flaws that the other 99% of us will not. It is highly recommended to copy players that are of average size and average physique. It's no secret that physical anomalies can help players get away with greater technical error. Pitchers throwing 100 miles an hour can make more mistakes than the pitcher that throws 90 miles an hour. And similarly, that supersized hitter, well, they should be cautiously copied. Those Aaron Judges. Look to copy Greg Maddux before copying Aroldis Chapman. Or look to copy Alex Bregman before copying the aforementioned Aaron Judge. I really like Chapman and I really like Judge, but it's tough to separate how much of their success comes from top-notch mechanics and training or their outlying genetics. Greg Maddux, Alex Bregman, Jose Altuve are definitely not genetic outliers and would easily blend in at the local grocery store. So you could give them the grocery store test. Before you go to copy a major league player, ask yourself, is this somebody who's going to blend in at your local grocery store? And if not, look to copy somebody that would blend in at the local grocery store. It reminds me of, and I'm going to go off the cuff here on this, it reminds me of watching the Dream Team documentary, and they had all the guys going out, and it was in Barcelona, and everybody was, getting checked, said hi to, and everybody was getting, photos and requests and whatnot. And there was John Stockton, and John Stockton just walked right down the middle of the main street, and not one person would even, stop to talk to him or even think that he was an NBA player, much less a Hall of Fame NBA player, and had been very successful for a very long time. And not only that, they actually have him on the documentary talking to a lady with a Dream Team shirt on. I believe she had a Dream Team shirt on. And he was messing with her in a nice way, kind of kidding with her, kind of trying to get her to see if she knew who he was. And she didn't have any idea, yet she was a Dream Team fan. So that's if I remember that story right. I'm trying to draw back on that memory. But so copy players that would blend in at the grocery store. Not Bo Jackson, not Giancarlo Stanton. All right. Copy normal size guys. And when I say normal, like normal size, like just everyday people like Jose Altuve, Mookie Betts. All right. Big guys can be great to learn from, but as a 6'7", 245-pound guy myself, I know firsthand that genetics, well, they contribute to an athlete's success. And that contribution, it can be extremely hard to measure. Genetically gifted players can still be copied when it comes to work ethic or their mental approach, though when it comes to the hitting technique, defensive technique, and pitching mechanics, I recommend first looking elsewhere. Copy actions, not words. Listen to what people do, not what they say. What the pros might say on TV or what they say when they're doing interviews may not always jive with what they're really doing or what really makes them great. For example, the other day I was listening to an all-time great pitcher, Pedro Martinez, discussing his pitching mechanics. Pedro is at the very top of my copy this guy's every move list, and he was a brilliant pitcher, an extremely good pitcher, first ballot Hall of Fame pitcher. However, the great Pedro Martinez erroneously told the audience that his left foot, when it landed at a 45-degree angle towards home plate. So it was 45 degrees rather than landing straight towards home plate when he was striding out, which really, when I went back and looked at all the video on him, was about 35 degrees from the truth. The 45-degree comment didn't sound correct, and after a quick image and video search, it was really evident and clearly evident that Pedro's left foot, his stride leg foot, landed at approximately 10 degrees, 5 to 10 degrees, not 45. Now, if a coach or player heard what Pedro had said, and I'm sure there were a lot of coaches and players listening, and without verifying it, went out and implemented his advice, they would likely find themselves really struggling, especially to clear that front side. As a pitcher, clearing that front side of that hip is so important. Our lists. Our number one goal here at 80/20 Baseball is to save coaches and players the guesswork on the path to success. Thus, we're going to share our list of top pitchers, top hitters, and top defenders right now. The lists were created using Fangraphs, Fangraphs.com, Weighted Runs Created Plus, all right, WRC Plus for hitters. So for the hitters, we use the Weighted Runs Created Plus. And if you go to Fangraphs.com, if you're familiar with, if you're familiar with these statistics, you've heard of the Weighted Runs Created Plus. And if you haven't, I think these are things that, are really interesting as in terms of really getting down to the granular level of what makes a hitter great and what kind of value they provide and what kind of offensive production they create, and most importantly, how much they affect that scoreboard. At the end of the day, it's all about how many runs a player creates, and that's why this stat is named Weighted Runs Created Plus. I'm not going to get all into the summary of the statistic, but it's an excellent statistic to accurately identify who the great hitters are. For pitchers, we're going to use FIP minus, Adjusted Fielder Independent Pitching. And for the defensive players, we're going to use UZR divided by 150, ultimate zone rating per 150 games. You can read all about those stats, like I said. You can read all about them online, and we're not going to dive into them here. Just trust me, these are excellent stats when it comes to measuring a player's productivity and influence on the outcome of a game. That's all that matters, is how many runs somebody saves, how many runs somebody prevents, and then on the offensive side, how many runs they create. Not how many base hits they had or how many stolen bases or this and that. All that matters is how many runs were they responsible for creating, and how many runs did they maybe cost their team, and on defense, how many runs did they save, and as a pitcher, how many runs did they prevent. That is all that matters in baseball. Now, the top 10 list of starting pitchers was based on a minimum of 1,500 innings pitched. That's to weed out the oft-injured pitchers that only had a few great years. We want to avoid copying pitchers that used unsustainable mechanics. Our top 10 list of hitters was based on Fangraphs' qualifying amount of at-bats to ensure that we analyzed hitters that continued success past that honeymoon stage, that get into the league and have success. And then what we were looking for is players that once the other teams figured out the hole in their swing or the holes in their swing, they still had success, either making adjustments to it or not falling into that trap over and over again. So when it came to identifying defensive players, we created a separate list for each position to account for each position's uniqueness. I think that's important because how good a center fielder is doesn't really have much to do with how great a catcher is as far as what qualifies them to be considered great at that position defensively. Lastly, the lists, they've been limited to players that were active within the past 20 years, and that's to allow for a higher quantity of video to go look at and to analyze. We will not discuss the mechanical and technical commonalities here, but I will cover those aspects in other, videos, podcasts, and things you can see on the 80/20 Baseball website. In any case, and now you have a formula for finding the best players to copy, as well as the pre-filtered, bonus list we've added for you here. So we're going to go over that list right now, starting with the hitters. Now remember, this is based off of what we consider, if not the best stat, one of the best stats, and that's weighted runs created plus. And also, this is from the last 20 years. So if you're asking why is Ted Williams, why is Babe Ruth not on this list, is because those are some old dudes. As great as they were, it's just hard to find a lot of film on them, although there is an excellent set of Ted Williams videos. I recommend every hitter going and watching, not just once, but twice. He doesn't show a lot of footage of him hitting, but there's a lot of what he's thinking. He explains his mental approach. We get into that a lot in the 3 True Hitting Plans article and podcast. Check that out. Now, moving to the hitters. Here we go. Number 1, last 20 years. This one doesn't surprise many people. Mike Trout. And I'll just go down the list in order here. This one's a little surprising to me, but I'm going off the stats. It's not what we think. It's not emotional. It's completely objective here in a sense where the subjectivity is taken out to the point where, it's as quantified as much as possible. But then again, at the end of the day, some person decided that stat and was that, had a certain validity, and that stat was put together by a person. So number 3 on the list, Miguel Cabrera, Chris Bryant, David Ortiz, Paul Goldschmidt, Josh Donaldson, Bryce Harper, Freddie Freeman, and lastly, Christian Yelich. Starting pitchers from the top down, best pitchers over the last 20 years. Pedro Martinez, Greg Maddux, John Smoltz, Clayton Kershaw. I would not copy Clayton Kershaw's mental approach in the playoffs. I really like Clayton. I do think he has some bulldog characteristics for sure. But as far as mechanics, I also think that he is much more of a genetic outlier than Greg Maddux, and even more of a genetic outlier than Pedro Martinez. Clayton's a big guy, big hands, left-handed. So next up, Curt Schilling, Roger Clemens, Max Scherzer, Mike Mussina, Roy Halladay. The late, great Roy Halladay. Relief pitchers, I got two here. Mariano Rivera, Tom Gordon. Catchers, Yadier Molina, Brian McCann, Russell Wilson. Now, as we get into defense, like as we just went over the catchers, this is not offensive based at all. This is purely how good they are defensively at preventing runs. Not necessarily how great they're at one specific, component of catching or whatever position they play. This is not, I read these articles all the time about this guy being a great pitch framer and this guy being a this, and he's got a pop time of this, but he can't call a game, worth a darn. And his game calling, approach or his plan or his capabilities are causing his team, an extra run or two a game. And, he's throwing out one extra runner a week. And at the end of the day, that's just a guy going to second, not necessarily a guy who's going to score inevitably. So now moving to first base, John Olerud, Mark Teixeira, Anthony Rizzo. Those are some surprising names, but first base is not necessarily a position of just superior athletes. Although those guys are all good athletes, and there's definitely some really good athletes over there. I love seeing those big guys doing the splits when they're stretching. Second base, Dustin Pedroia, Chase Utley, Mark Ellis. Shortstop at the top of this list is probably anybody who follows baseball can guess this one right away. I know he's out here on the West Coast now and a little more under the radar because it's West Coast, and if he were on the Yankees, he'd be the captain and have names like that are really cool. But the Simba, Alderton Simmons, number one on the shortstop list. If you go look at his statistics, they're incredible. They're just unreal. He is very likely to go down as the greatest defensive shortstop of all time. And I know Ozzie Smith's up there, and man, he was good. And there was a lot of great shortstops. But I think if he continues, definitely on a WAR rate, on a WAR scale like wins above replacement, he's got a great shot. It's incredible how far he is ahead of all the other shortstops, statistically speaking, at this point in his career. And he's not that old, although he is slowing down a tick than 5 years ago, but he's still super amazing. Second on the list, Francisco Lindor. Man, that guy's awesome. Fun to watch. And I love when they mic him up. I love when they mic Francisco Lindor up during the All-Star games or whenever they can mic him up. Man, he is awesome. Hey, go YouTube Francisco Lindor mic'd up during a game. He's awesome, man. He's just great to listen to. Next up, Paul DeJong, shortstop. That might surprise you, but hey, again, this is just the list of not who's on your favorite team and whatnot. It's just who are the top guys. Third base, Matt Chapman, Evan Longoria, Anthony Rendon, Nolan Arenado. Those four names, I think, are pretty understandable from just a general baseball fan's perspective. You can see like, oh yeah, I get that. I don't need a stat to tell me how great those guys are. And outfield, Andrew Jones, Mookie Betts, Jason Hayward, Alex Gordon, and Ender Inciarte. All right. So we're going to ender with Ender. And that concludes this. Thank you so much for your time. This has been Coach Bo. And remember, copy correctly. Copy the right players. Copy the right things that those players do. And remember, the success does leave clues. And it's important that we copy those things that each player or that players have in common as far as success goes. Be very hesitant to copy something that some great player does that nobody else does or a few others do. I mean, a good example of that is like a knuckle curve. Mike Mussina threw a knuckle curve and had a lot of success. But that doesn't mean the knuckle curve is better than just a traditional curveball. That's just a small example or one example of many, I think, that we have to be careful of. One, try to avoid copying those big athletic players, big, strong, just physically gifted players, okay? Because that can be deceiving. There could be flaws in their game that they overcome because they are just so genetically gifted or they have so much competitive grit and things like that. So it's important for youth players to be careful who to copy when it comes to genetics. When a guy like Jose Altuve hits a home run 450 feet, he did everything right. There was nothing going on inefficiently. There was nothing going on incorrectly with that swing. When a guy like Jose Altuve hits a ball 450 feet and he's the size of your average ninth grader, you know he's doing everything right. Now, when Aaron Judge hits one 450 feet, he was doing most things right, of course. But when Aaron Judge hits a home run, there's times where he just uses pure leverage and pure size. And I get it, he's talented and a great guy, but there's definitely a bigger advantage there. And so I also think it's important to look across the board, not only at the size of the player, but also look at all the things that great hitters do and look for commonalities. Because all great hitters are going to have little quirks, they're going to have little things that they do, but look for the things that they all do the same, that they all share, or at least like in Will Smith's example, not all top 10 movies had creatures, love stories, and special effects, but I believe it was like 7 out of 10 of them had those 3 characteristics. And those 3 characteristics were much more prevalent than those things that were in 1 or 2 or just 3 of those top 10 movies. All right, Coach Bo here. Take care.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Experience.
This is a really good team, and so you have to earn everything you have against them and take opportunities when they present themselves.
Take it to the field.